An emotional tribute to our 41st president as the nation salutes George H.W. Bush. Welcome to a brand new hour of America's Newsroom. I'm Sandra Smith.
And I'm Bill Henry. Good morning. President Bush's casket arriving with a solemn ceremony late yesterday at the U.S. Capitol, where his body will lie in state until tomorrow morning. The flag-draped coffin now resting on the same wooden frame used for President Lincoln. Members of the Bush family and his administration attending the arrival ceremony. It was quite remarkable to watch as congressional leaders honored his dedication to public service.
To the Bush family, on behalf of the whole House, Republicans and Democrats, we are profoundly sorry for your loss. And we are honored to celebrate this wonderful life with you.
A steady hand, staying the course. That's what George Bush gave us for decades. Through the Cold War and the Soviet Union's collapse, he kept us on course. When the rule of law needed defending in the Persian Gulf, he kept us on course.
William Longinus leads our coverage this hour, live at the Bush Library in College Station, Texas. And how are preparations for Thursday there? William, good morning.
Good morning, Bill. Well, the library is closed for the next 3 days, so we came over here to the train station, and it, as you can see, is restricted as well right now. The president's long and remarkable journey will end here in College Station, Texas, home of Texas A&M, and actually the city owes its existence to the fact that the university was here where the train station is located. Now, the president will fly back from Washington to Houston tomorrow night. The public will be invited to view him there at St. Martin's Episcopal Church in Houston. Thursday morning, there'll be a service, and then at 1 p.m., the funeral train will come here. Preparations are underway. They're building actually a riser right now where the funeral car with the casket will be unloaded. It's kind of an old-fashioned way to say goodbye to the president. Last funeral train was President Eisenhower in 1969. Union Pacific has outfitted and painted a diesel locomotive to resemble Air Force One. It's 90 miles from Houston to here, College Station. Train will go about 40 miles an hour, 2.5 hours. 8 cities, people will line that route to say goodbye and to the president. Also, there's a tradition here at Texas A&M. It was started as a military college. 2,400 cadets are still here. They will line the driveway leading to the burial site. We spoke to one yesterday who said he is honored to be part of the ceremony.
We really appreciate that he took a liking to our university and this city, and there's something really special about that, and that we want to, carry that on and never forget him for everything he did. It definitely means a lot, to be able to be part of something that, so big, so much bigger than me, on top of Texas A&M, being, within that band, I guess to play, him out one last time with all his family there. It's going to be really special.
Texas, of course, Bill, is the president's adopted state. There was a music festival last night, a tribute to the president. The ceremony, rather, will be private on Thursday. Back to you.
Yeah, William Longinus there live in Texas. Thanks.
Another top story today, CIA Director Gina Haspel set to brief Senate committee leaders on the murder of Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle were angry she was not there last week when Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and Defense Secretary Mattis briefed them on Saudi Arabia. Our next guest has been demanding to hear from Haspel. He is our headliner today. Kentucky Senator Rand Paul of the Foreign Relations Committee joins us now. Thank you, Senator, for being here this morning. Why do you want to hear from Gina Haspel? What do you want to know?
Well, to my mind, this is the very definition of the deep state. The deep state is that the intelligence agencies do things, conclude things, make conclusions, but then the elected officials are prevented from knowing about this. So if we aren't told about this, if I'm not allowed to know about these conclusions, then I can't have oversight. And so then the state grows, the intelligence, the deep state grows and has more and more power. So I've read in the media that the CIA has said with high confidence that the Crown Prince was involved with killing Khashoggi. I have not seen that intelligence, nor have I even seen the conclusions. And today there's yet another briefing, and I'm being excluded from that. So really, this is the deep state at work, that your representatives don't know what is going on in the intelligence agencies.
Senator, do you trust James Mattis? Senator, can you hear us? Well, that's unfortunate. Let's hang with us for a moment here and see if we can get the audio back to Senator Rand Paul's ear there on Capitol Hill. And Senator Paul has been very disturbed by the briefing or lack thereof. James Mattis said over the weekend at the Reagan Defense Forum in California when Brett was interviewing that there is no smoking gun, which was the same thing Mike Pompeo said last week as well on the...
So this highly anticipated briefing is expected to take place at the top of the 11 a.m. hour, again, on the murder of the Washington Post columnist Khashoggi. So as you just heard from Rand Paul there, frustration with the transfer of information. Unfortunately, we lost his shot. We'll try to get him back, but that doesn't always happen.
He was mentioning the deep state there, and right before he came on the air with us, he sent a tweet out, and here's what the tweet said from Senator Rand Paul. It says, "You want to know what the deep state is? The CIA director is coming to the U.S. Senate, only briefing a select few members of the Senate. Why should not every senator know what's going on? The deep state wants to keep everyone in the dark. This is just ridiculous." So Gina Haspel will be there. I believe 8 senators will be there, present there for that briefing today.
Just some of the things that we could eventually talk to Rand Paul. We're going to try to get him back here. But Lindsey Graham talking very tough on the Saudis. And here's the latest words from him. Oh, I'm sorry. It is a quote. "Left unchecked, Saudi Arabia's recent behavior will help Iran by driving a wedge between the U.S. and our other Middle East allies. Lebanon, Jordan, and others need assurance that America won't bend to the whims of the Crown Prince. He is a wrecking ball to U.S.-Saudi relations." And I do believe that we have Senator Paul back.
All right.
Are you with us, Senator Paul?
I am. I think that was the deep state getting involved in our audio.
It could very well have been. The question was that went unanswered. Do you trust James Mattis?
Well, I think that there are good instincts, and I think he has a world of experience that he brings to the table. But when he says that there's no direct evidence, I don't think he's answering the appropriate question. The question is there enough evidence, direct or indirect, to conclude that the Crown Prince was involved? And apparently the media is reporting that the CIA did conclude with high confidence that that the Crown Prince was involved and directed this. And so I guess my biggest complaint is that Congress is supposed to have oversight. The people elect representatives to have oversight over the intelligence agencies. And when some of us complain about the deep state, what we're complaining about is that we're being prevented from oversight. So the CIA director's coming to Capitol Hill today, and I'm still being excluded from hearing or seeing the evidence of the Crown Prince's involvement.
But you know that James Mattis and Mike Pompeo both said there was no smoking gun. To that you say what?
Well, I think they're answering the wrong question. Ask them whether or not they agree or disagree with the CIA's conclusion that all of the evidence that we've seen adds up to make us really think strongly with high confidence that did it. See, I don't think they're disagreeing with the CIA. They're just saying they're answering a different question. They're saying no direct evidence, no smoking gun, but ask them a more specific question. Do you absolutely disagree with the CIA's conclusion? All the text messages between the Crown Prince and the thugs that did the killing. The Crown Prince's brother apparently talked to Khashoggi to try to convince him that he would be safe. So there's all of this evidence pointing towards the Crown Prince. The CIA concludes with high confidence. Of course, they're not letting us see that. And then I don't know how we can say that Mattis, I mean, they really need to be asked that question. So, do they disagree with the CIA's conclusions?
So before we move on, Senator, what do you expect to happen here at the top of the next hour when this briefing takes place?
I suspect they're trying to trade this briefing with a few people to try to get them to vote against the resolution next week. We have a privilege motion that will be on the floor. 63 of us voted to get onto this privilege motion, which is a motion that says the president has to discontinue his support for Saudi Arabia's war in Yemen. And so this is a big deal, but I think they're giving the briefing in hopes of trying to get some people to change their vote. I think they may suspect I won't change my vote, which is true, but that doesn't mean that I, as an elected official representing an entire state, should not be granted the same privilege as every other senator to see this information.
Let's see how far you get. In the meantime, we've got some other matters to talk about. Trade truce with China. I'm not quite sure how you feel about this just yet. Here's what the president said about how things are going thus far. Watch.
The relationship is very special, the relationship that I have with President Xi. And I think that is going to be a very primary reason why we'll probably ending up getting something that will be good for China and good for the United States.
So the talks continue. The truce has been declared. How are we doing?
You know, historically, tariff wars have ended badly, and I've been worried that getting involved with the trade wars with China is a bad thing. So I'm not for tariffs because I think they're taxes on American consumers who may well buy Chinese products. That being said, I think there is, some argument that the president's trying to negotiate from a position of strength and show the Chinese that he's not afraid to have tariffs on. And so perhaps he has more negotiating leverage and strength than any other president has had, and maybe he will drive a better bargain. If the end result is lower tariffs, which the president has said that's what he's for, and more free trade, then I will be happy that it happened. If it devolves into more of a trade war, then I'll be saying, oh, my goodness, we shouldn't have done this. And so that's kind of where I am at this point.
Very interesting stuff. So as far as the Russian tensions, they continue to rise. And fresh off the G20 summit in Argentina, Senator, a lot of questions about where the president stands here ahead of the G20. He said he doesn't like that Russian aggression one bit. He took action. And the latest coming from the White House, Secretary Mike Pompeo said this about those Russian tensions. Listen to this.
Russia hasn't embraced Western values of freedom and international cooperation. Rather, it has suppressed opposition voices and invaded the sovereign nations of Georgia and of Ukraine. Moscow has also deployed a military-grade nerve agent on foreign soil, right here in Europe, in violation of the Chemical Weapons Convention, to which it is a party. Russia has violated the Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty for many years. The list goes on. We have to account for the world order of today in order to chart the way forward.
Are we being tough enough on Russia?
I think we've got hundreds and hundreds of sanctions in place. We've let them know we're unhappy. And really, at this point, I think Russia does need to step up and change their behavior. Boarding foreign vessels, trying to kill a double agent in Britain with nerve gas. There's all kinds of things that are adding up that Russia has to decide, do they want to be more part of a peaceful trading relationship with us or not? On our side, we need to let them know that the sanctions could be removed if there's better behavior. I think finding a peaceful solution in Ukraine and having Russia no longer involved or arming folks to sow discontent in eastern Ukraine would be a big step forward. It would also be in Russia's self-interest to do that. But Russia has to figure out if they want to find a way forward. In the meantime, I think we also need to understand that nuclear arms control and nuclear discussions should continue. I've advised the president and General Kelly that I think we should appoint nuclear negotiators to talk about our differences with the INF Treaty, the one on short-range and medium missiles. And I think it would be a good idea to continue conversation despite our differences.
Well, Senator, thank you for coming by today. I hope you come back, okay? And we'll see whether or not you have luck today with Gina Haspel. Thank you, sir.
Thanks.
You bet. 13 past the hour. Roll this now. There could be developments coming this week in the Mueller matter. A series of court filings on tap, potentially shedding light on the findings of the special counsel. Catherine Herridge is on that live in Washington. Catherine, what do you have? Good morning.
Well, thanks, Bill, and good morning. Special Counsel Robert Mueller is scheduled to file the sentencing memo today for former National Security Advisor Mike Flynn. These memos lay out all factors that the court should consider to determine type and length of sentence. Flynn pled guilty a year ago this month, December 2017, to one count of making false statements to the FBI about his contact and communications with the Russian ambassador Sergei Kislyak. Significantly, the sentencing has been postponed by Mueller's team 4 times. The memo is expected to shed more light on Flynn's contact with the Russian ambassador Kislyak, on other evidence against Flynn, and more significantly, his level of cooperation. It's widely reported that Flynn has sat for multiple interviews with the special counsel. But there are complicating factors. This House Republican-led Russia investigation that was published in March found a potential conflict, that while Flynn pled guilty to lying to the FBI about his contact with the Russian ambassador, there was evidence that agents found no signs of deception. This is called Finding 22 in the Republican report. It reads in part, General Flynn pleaded guilty to making a false statement to the Federal Bureau of Investigation regarding his December 2016 conversations with Ambassador Kislyak, even though the Federal Bureau of Investigation agents did not detect any deception during Flynn's interview. That's important because it was based on testimony from former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe and former FBI Director James Comey, who, as you know, is now scheduled to give a transcribed interview under oath to Republicans on Friday, and that interview will be behind closed doors, Bill.
So there's conventional wisdom out of Washington suggesting that he'll wrap things up before Christmas. What do you have on that, Kathy?
Well, that's right. As a matter of practice, sentencing memos and recommendations come towards the end of the legal process, and later this week, we're also expecting Mueller's team to submit a brief about its allegations that former campaign chairman Paul Manafort violated his plea agreement, and on what basis. Manafort's legal team accuses the special counsel of strong-arm tactics, wanting information that their client cannot provide, does not have, or may not exist. While the memo is a public document, some parts will likely be redacted or under seal to protect ongoing elements of the investigation. And on top of that, we're expecting more court filings in the Michael Cohen case. And as you know, last week, the president's former personal attorney cut a deal for lying to Congress about this Moscow real estate project in 2016.
21 days before Christmas. Thank you, Catherine Herridge, on that live in D.C. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Well, a short delay in the battle over the border wall, the new deadline to prevent a government shutdown, now just days before Christmas. Louisiana Senator John Kennedy will join us for a look at the latest efforts to come to an agreement. Plus, there's this.
I think President Trump's strategy on tariffs were very effective. I think it created first time a real change in the willingness to address certain issues.
So the Trump team says if anyone can get a deal with China, it is this president. Charles Payne has an answer on that. Here he comes. His take. I see it, Charles. Loaded with cold medicine, I do believe.
Let's just get right to it. Charles Payne is here, the host of Making Money on the Fox Business Network. A rally yesterday, Charles, not so much today. Hopes of a truce and a trade deal actually getting done with China. What's happening now?
I actually think the meeting over the weekend was better than anticipated and certainly achieved more than a whole lot of Wall Street experts. I mean, listen, we were up last week 500 points, 100 points, 600 points, 200 points, almost 300 points yesterday. We're giving some of it back today. That's normal trading. We're looking forward to Friday with the big jobs report. So this is sort of normal stuff. We actually have made a huge rebound in the last 6 trading days.
Saw Steve Mnuchin on with Maria a bit earlier today. He was talking about it yesterday as well. Here's his comment from yesterday first. Watch.
I think there's a specific understanding that we're going to now turn the agreement that the two presidents have into a real agreement over the 90 days. Obviously, some of the issues are going to need to be phased in. Some of the issues may need more detailed work, but the idea is there will be a real agreement. And as I've said, this is the first time there was a commitment from China that the agreement will include specific dates, specific targets, specific action items. This is not going to be just kicking the can down the road.
It's a very interesting statement. I think about what James Mattis, and I know a lot of the Fox viewers here got to see him over the weekend at the Reagan Library. He believes that the entire Trump administration will be judged on how we foster this Chinese relationship outwards of 15 years from now. Just think about that now. Well, how you lay the foundation for a better framework for decades to come.
Well, to be quite frank with you, if that's the case, we should be looking really poorly at the last 15 years, right? Because that's what got us in this bind in the first place. The inadequacy of presidents. There are no images of President Obama sitting across from President Xi. There are no images of President Bush sitting across from his Chinese counterpart. There are no images of President Clinton sitting across the table negotiating with his Chinese counterpart. Instead, throughout that time, what we do see, 7 million manufacturing jobs gone. We see China's economy become a juggernaut, ironically, because of the use of tariffs, because of intellectual property theft. So, listen.
Well, what you're saying is that this administration is willing to take Beijing on, and others did not.
Others did not. They did not. And here's the most important thing, I think, coming out of this. Who's running it now? Lighthizer. Everyone should research Lighthizer's background. He is the perfect person for this. Not only does he know how to do this, he knows how to put the deal on paper. It's one thing to have broad strokes. But it's another thing. He's been studying this for a long time. He has written about state capitalism, which sounds like almost like oxymoronic. But he has warned against the dangers of economies like ours, free market economies, trying to go against economies where backed with government subsidies, where they can have industries like steel losing money year after year after year after year, bankrupt our steel manufacturing, and put hundreds of thousands of people out of work. So they have this sort of component. He has been an advocate of fighting fire with fire until we can get what we want.
To be clear, there were meetings with President Obama and President Xi, and
I never saw any meeting like that they were sitting face to face.
Other things.
I'm talking about on trade.
But specifically, I'm just asking you, can you talk about the relationship that we are seeing between Trump and Xi today and compare that to the previous presidency?
Well, I think it sounds like a good relationship. They both more or less say the right things. President Xi gave a couple speeches last week in Spain leading up to the meeting. And, he's talking about free markets. He's talking about not being protectionist. It's sort of ironic coming from a protectionist country. He's talking about, not going in alone. So he's trying to take the mantle for that, but he's got to practice what he would like to be the leader of the world. And, everyone thinks there's a leadership vacuum, whether it's Macron on climate or Xi thinking that he could take the leadership role with respect to commerce from Trump. But you have to practice what you preach, right? So we'll see what happens.
Wall Street Journal, quickly, U.S. markets wobble. Cash is king. Finally. Oh, my gosh. U.S. cash and cash equivalents are on track to be some of the best performing assets in 2018. You holding cash, or do you like that headline?
I got a little cash. I got about 15% in cash right now.
Yeah, what's percent?
15%. 15% in cash. Here's the thing. I think the audience remembers those certificate of deposits. Remember those?
Oh, my God.
1985. Certainly. You know what a 5-year certificate of deposit paid annually?
And what year?
What year?
1985.
I'll say 5.5%.
I was going to say 6.
10.65%. Oh my God, can you imagine that?
Sign me up.
You blow most Wall Street money managers out the water, like 99% of them. That's amazing. And last year it paid 0.8%. Yeah. And let's not even talk about a 6-month that used to pay almost 9%, paid 1/16%. So 1/16 of 1%.
CDs are making a comeback. Is that what you're saying?
I was just saying, people remember it, right? So cash is, if you have money in cash this year, you're doing better than treasuries. You're doing better than corporate bonds, high yield, and investment grade. You're doing better than the world markets.
Would you take 10%?
Yes.
I take it.
Absolutely.
For sure.
Absolutely.
Thank you. See you 2 o'clock.
Right. See you later.
There's some growing tensions, southern border. Back to that story in a moment. Desperate caravan migrants reportedly breaching the fence, some of them in a bid for asylum. We are live on the border with that, Sandra.
Plus, violent protests across Paris over rising fuel taxes. And now the French government caving to their demands. Our A-team is here, and they will take that one up with these scenes and what they say about socialist policies.
We got criminal organizations profiting off of vulnerable families, charging $5,000 to $7,000 per person. That's a $2.5 billion business of exploitation. We've got to stop it, and we've got to partner with Mexico to do it.
That's the Commissioner of the Customs and Border Protection last hour weighing in on the crisis of the border, escalating yet again yesterday. At least 24 desperate caravan migrants trying to breach the border fence, hoping illegal entry would allow them for asylum. Steve Harrigan's live in Tijuana, Mexico, with the latest on what's happening today. Steve, good morning.
Bill, the latest footage comes from Yuma, Arizona. It's Customs and Border Patrol footage. It shows a Guatemalan family scaling an 18-foot wall. It's a family that includes children aged 2, 7, and 10. And you can see the children are dropped from that 18-foot wall. One of those children is injured, a facial injury. Eventually, they surrender to customs agents and receive treatment. The dropper returns to Mexico. Here in Tijuana, there's a real sense among local officials that this migrant caravan is putting a strain on local resources.
It's illegal to sleep on the streets. We've been letting them and trying to court them or gently remind them that this is not a shelter anymore. They're on the street. The shelter is closed. It's a big health problem for us, what's happening there.
The Mexican government has cut off food and water to the sports complex that used to house 6,000 migrants. They've opened up a new shelter 11 miles further away from the U.S. border. The hope is that there won't be any sparks of outrage like there was a week ago when some of the migrants tried to storm the border here. That cost the people and the business owners in Tijuana a lot of money, something Mexican officials do not want to repeat. Bill, back to you.
Thank you, Steve. Steve Harrigan live at the border there in Tijuana, Mexico.
All right, we were expecting Colin Powell in the Rotunda visiting there to pay his respects to the former president, George H.W. Bush. This is a live look at Capitol Hill right now, where President Bush's former Joint Chiefs, some of the commanders from Desert Storm, are there saying their goodbyes and official salutes.
the leadership that President Bush displayed during the invasion of Kuwait in August of 1990 and how he summoned dozens and dozens of countries from around the world to join the U.S. coalition, to assemble in the deserts of Saudi Arabia, then eventually in January of 1991 pushed Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait within a week's time. It was a remarkable display of American diplomacy and military action. Some have debated as to whether or not you go further into Iraq, but President Bush at the time said, this is the mandate and this is where we will stop.
Beautiful ceremony last night. Paul Ryan brought everybody together, spoke to those that gathered in the Capitol Rotunda to pay their respects and say their goodbyes. Let's bring in America's A-Team now. Steve Hilton is here, host of The Next Revolution. And there he is, Tom Bevan, co-founder and publisher of Real Clear Politics, and Fox News political analyst Juan Williams, co-host of The Five. It continues to be a very beautiful scene there in the Capitol Rotunda, and we're reminded of this moment when we all can come together. In prayer last night, it was a beautiful moment, and we enjoy that now, but we wonder, Steve, what happens next week after this period of mourning concludes, and we all do say our goodbyes and honor the former president.
Yeah, it's a beautiful week, and just as a Brit observing this, it's a really wonderful reminder of everything that's great about America. I've been very moved by watching the ceremonies, the arrival yesterday at Andrews Air Force Base. I was particularly emotional, actually. I found it really emotional, but I think sadly, although everyone's saying, is this a moment that we can sort of move to a more bipartisan approach, I just don't think that's going to happen. Same sort of things were said after John McCain's death and the ceremonies around that, and I think the truth is that it's not about people wishing for more bipartisanship or saying it. In the end, I think it actually comes down to really practical things, often quite nerdy things to do with the process and the structure in Congress. And I think the one thing we can be positive about is there are people now trying to reform the way Congress works. I had a couple on my show this weekend from the Problem Solvers Caucus trying to reform the rules of Congress. Mike Gallagher, actually, a Republican congressman from Wisconsin, got some really interesting ideas about changing the way members work in order to try and alter this kind of blockage that seems to be there. But I don't know. I don't think
you guys were the problem solvers each time out here. Tom, what do you think of this?
Yeah, look, I agree with Steve. I mean, the idea that this is going to suddenly transform the dysfunction of the Capitol into some, bipartisan factory is just not going to happen. I mean, the issues are too great. The divisions between the two parties are too wide, and there's no indication that with the Democrats taking control of Congress, where they can find, there may be a couple of issues where there's some area, but again, there are enough sticking.
January is going to be a hardball.
Absolutely.
We can expect that. When you reflect on the life of President Bush, I mean, you were at the Reagan White House covering for the Washington Post. Right. What do you think about their relationship, or what do you recall? Is there a vivid moment or an image that you remember from that?
Well, I mean, even before President Reagan came in, obviously George H.W. Bush was famously said, I think your supply-side economics are voodoo economics, and it alienated the whole Reagan team. They didn't like it. It was an effective political retort at the time. And then, as you recall, he was not President Reagan's first choice as vice president. Then Republican nominee Reagan was looking back to Gerald Ford. And it was only that, oh yeah, well, he's a moderate. He will help with the idea that Reagan is portrayed in the media as too radically right to bring George Bush on. And it proved an effective political strategy, because Bush won handily in 80 and then overwhelmingly in 84 versus Mondale. Yeah. But I think they were very different people, if that's your point, Bill. Yep. I mean, one is the GE spokesman, the actor, larger than life. If he walked into the studio right now, we'd all be like, there he is, But when George H.W. Bush walks in the room, it's more like, there's my pal. There's a very smart policy wonk,
but an
energetic
man.
Well, energetic on some level, but thoughtful. It was like he was the compassionate, thoughtful friend.
Yeah. It makes you wonder, though, what was different about that time than where we are today, and why different things were possible then.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of factors that have driven us to where we are. Cable news, social media, the sort of great sorting that's taking place in this country, where the sort of blue areas are getting bluer, red areas are getting redder. But one of the things that comes through in all of these tributes, and everyone who came across George H.W. Bush remarked about the fact that he was just such a nice, respectful, sensitive man, didn't swear, was always very courteous to everyone involved, staff, members of the opposite political party. It didn't matter, and that's something that we don't see very often these days.
Because we have spoken with so many of his former staff members, both yesterday as well today, talked to another one of his speechwriters, and they all say while he was this gracious man, a loving family man, and so pleasant to work with, he was tough, Steve.
Yeah, I think that's you saw that in his response to some of the international situations that they had to deal with. But honestly, I think it's important also to make the point that sometimes the kind of going along consensus-driven approach isn't actually the right way to get the right outcomes. And I think there are people who think, you know what, we needed a change from those days when everyone just got together and did things that may have benefited a certain group of society, but not necessarily working people, I'm thinking of particularly. And so sometimes disruption is necessary in order to make progress.
So I think that's the point here, is when we talk about today versus yesterday, we don't talk about Donald Trump. But Donald Trump is the disruptor that Steve was talking about. And I think, Steve, when you say working people, you're talking about what Trump calls the forgotten man. In terms of the American base.
I'm talking about the people who've lost out from the kind of elitist policy consensus.
For example, Bush did NAFTA. Bush is NAFTA.
Right,
and so a lot of people are angry at NAFTA today. We just saw President Trump, for example, try to renegotiate NAFTA.
And go back to the days before NAFTA was agreed to.
Right. And also, if you think about one of Bush's political liabilities, it was read my lips, no new taxes, and then making a deal, what Steve's talking about, compromise for the good of the country. The economy took off. The economy of the 90s benefited greatly from the deficit reduction in that tax plan.
To be continued. Fair enough. I really think the shot of the week is the camera on top of the rotunda. It's
beautiful.
It's really a remarkable American moment. Thank you, Steve. Welcome to the USA yet again. Juan, we're going to keep you despite what Tom says. Thanks for coming back. Okay, nice to see you again.
Thanks to all three of you.
20 minutes before the hour now. Got a reprieve in the battle over the border wall out of respect for the death of President Bush. The deadline for a government shutdown, though, is still looming large, so we're going to have to deal with this in the next 2 weeks. Senator John Kennedy joins us in a moment whether or not Congress can deliver. He's coming up next live. We are less than 30 minutes away from the CIA director briefing a handful of senators on the Hill about the Khashoggi matter out of Saudi Arabia. Louisiana Senator John Kennedy is with us now. He's on the Senate Judiciary and Budget Committee. Senator, thank you for coming back. It's always to have you here. I don't believe you're going to be in that room. Last hour, Rand Paul said this is the deep state in action. He's none too happy either. What is your feeling?
Well, first, Merry Christmas and Happy Hanukkah to both of you. Rand's right. With the exception of Israel, all the leaders in the Middle East are pirates. We settle disputes with elections. They settle them with executions. I think Prince Mohammed gave the order, or at least he knew about it, to butcher Khashoggi. Prince Mohammed, he really was the original El Chapo, literally. Number two, I know the CIA director's meeting with some senators today. She must be getting political advice from Chuck Schumer. It's just going to, I'm glad she's meeting with some, but it's going to piss off the ones who aren't in the meeting, who would like to know what the facts are too. Number three, Lindsey Graham is right. We don't have to choose between power and principle. What we got to do is figure out a way to punish the hell out of Saudi Arabia without blowing up the Middle East. And number four, you know, the best answer for America, the best revenge, if you will, let's become energy independent. Let's just let American free enterprise loose. Then we won't have to depend on any of the countries in the Middle East for oil. And so long as they leave Israel alone and don't get nuclear weapons, they can do what they want to for each other. And I think that's the way most Americans feel.
Got to move on to the topic of a possible government shutdown over the president's border wall. $5 billion he's asking for. Can the two sides come to an agreement? Will something get done, Senator?
Well, we should. We will, I believe. The president's right. Border walls, barriers, whatever you want to call them, they work. We've got about 600 miles worth of walls and barriers out of 2,000 miles. Some of them need repairs. I think we ought to give the president the full $5 billion. Here's one thing I would caution the president on. The bureaucrats at Homeland Security contend that it costs $25 million a mile to build a wall. Now, we built 2,700 miles of walls along our interstates in America for like $4 billion. I think that the president, if he gets the bureaucrats at Homeland Security to sharpen their pencil and we hold hearings, we can make that $5 billion stretch a lot further. But he's right, and we ought to appropriate the money.
You got about 2 weeks to get it done.
We'll get it done. If everybody will act responsibly and put aside some of the politics in the holiday season and act, try to fake it if you have to, but act like adults, we'll get it done.
Well, there's a report that suggests you might run for governor and leave your Senate position. You want to shed some light on that?
Well, yeah, I made an announcment yesterday. I'm not going to run. I'm going to stay in the Senate. It was a tough decision for me. I mean, it was a close call, but when you don't know what to do, sometimes you just have to trust your gut. And my gut said I'm enjoying being a senator and to stay, and I think I can do the most good up here. Nobody's indispensable. Somebody good in Louisiana will run for governor and beat the governor that we have, because he's not much. I mean, he's a lot if you like a socialist, but he's just not my cup of tea.
Senator Kennedy, it was great to have you on the program this morning. We always appreciate you coming on America's Newsroom, sir.
Thanks, guys.
As Americans pay their respects to our 41st president, some political analysts are pointing out that the complimentary media coverage his legacy is getting now is a whole lot different than the kind of coverage he got back when he was serving as president. Howie Kurtz will join us to break that down. America preparing to bid a final farewell to the late George Herbert Walker Bush, the 41st president lying in state at the U.S. Capitol until tomorrow morning. And the media has covered his passing. How they've been covering his passing has become a bit of an issue. Howie Kurtz is author of the new column, Media Elevate Bush in Death, Use His Passing to Denigrate Trump. Joining us now is Howard Kurtz, Fox News media analyst and host of Media Buzz. First and foremost, this is a day, Howie, to look back and remember the 41st president. But of course, there has been discussion about the way his passing has been covered.
Yeah, first of all, I mean, there's just been this emotional outpouring about the kinder and gentler and just plain decent style of George Herbert Walker Bush. And I think that's great. But I do have to contrast that with how he was actually covered as a candidate and as president when he was, for example, it was that infamous Newsweek cover, The Wimp Factor. This for a guy who was a World War II hero. There was, of course, criticism of the Willie Horton ad in the '88 campaign. When he broke his no new taxes, read my lips pledge, instead of saying, well, he did what he thought was right for the country at a time of rising deficits, it was like he lied and he hurt himself and all of that. I think looking back, the qualities of kindness and decency that we now celebrate in Bush 41 is a stark contrast to the hyperpolarized times we find ourselves in. So in a way, it's a kind of a nostalgia for a Washington, Sandra, that no longer exists.
Here's the question you asked. How is it that a decent man so widely celebrated in the wake of his death was often depicted as a weak and passive president? Question mark.
Well, I think some of that is the passage of time and the healing of wounds. And of course, people tend to say nice things about folks who have moved on. But I think it's more than that, Bill. I really think that, for example, Bush drew some criticism for the Gulf War, his singular achievement in foreign policy, an incredible accomplishment for not finishing the job and toppling Saddam. But given what happened when his son accomplished regime change and what a quagmire Iraq turned into, that looks very different in 2018 than it might have at the time.
And, this is the middle of a week in which we all will be honoring the passing of our 41st president. And next week begins a new week. And we were just having this discussion here in America's Newsroom with our A-team, Howie, on how next week will shape and how all of this will come to an end. It's been nice for a few days.
Yeah, it's been a nice pause in the partisan wars, and President Trump has been gracious, even though he has, had an ongoing feud with the Bush family, tweeting nice things. But I have to say that some of the pundits who are praising George H.W. Bush can't resist the opportunity to turn it into Trump bashing. I mean, Washington Post headline, honorable, gracious, and decent. In death, Bush becomes a yardstick for President Trump. And I just think this should be about Bush, the man, his legacy, his presidency, his vice presidency. Everything doesn't have to be about Trump, but some of the people who are not fans of this president just can't resist in trying to use it to disparage the 45th.